G'day, g'day, and welcome back to another episode of A Lot to Talk About. It is your boy, the captain of the ship, the man in charge, Bradley J. Dryburgh. But of course, you can call me Brad, and pumped to be here for another episode. We're getting close to that 100, the Century Club, and it's really exciting. It would have actually almost been fitting to get this guy on for number 100, but the tail of the tape doesn't always go as planned, and I guess you'll get what I mean by that in the coming minutes. But I'm going to give him an intro he very well deserves. He is a fellow Aussie who's at the moment living over in Venice, California. He has a very inspiring story, a story that began far before, I guess, this journey did, but this journey truly began with a bit of tragedy, the loss of a mate. And the loss of someone in your life often makes you think and consider the path that you're on and the life that you've been living. And for this man, it made him realize it wasn't the life he exactly wanted to tell stories of it at the time it has come to an end. And he changed his direction. He found a new goal and a new purpose in life. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So ladies and gentlemen, from your home, your car, or wherever you are, give a very warm welcome to the one, the only Sebastian Terry. How are you, brother?
Oh, mate, I'm good. What an introduction. Thanks.
Mate,
Captain of the ship. Wow, I love it.
Mate, it's a self-proclaimed nickname. I'm calling myself the captain. I actually changed the name on my Instagram to the captain, and it's caught on with about 2 or 3 people. But we'll see. We'll see. I think persistence is the key, right?
Thanks for having me today, buddy.
Bro, it's an absolute pleasure. Like I said when we chatted just before hitting record, it's probably about 12 months ago now that you come across my Instagram feed, and I love your story. And I'm always looking for stories like this that are inspiring and I guess shift people's perspective on life and the life that we should be really pursuing and hoping to live. And your story really speaks to that. It speaks to tragedy and loss and the way that shifts your perspective. But I guess before we dive into all of that, it'd be great to get, I guess, a little bit of who Seb is and where life started for you.
How do you mean? When I was a kid?
Yeah, like where'd you grow up? What was the course of school, study, work?
I love it. All right, so born in Sydney, Hornsby, 1981. Stayed there for 2 years. Then as a family, we moved to Norway because my dad was working as a draftsman, so he worked on oil platforms. And then we stayed there for a couple of years, and I began to speak Norwegian as a kid. And my dad hated that. So we moved to England for 10 years until I was 14. And then we went back to Australia. So I kind of moved back to Australia when I didn't know anyone. I didn't know, anything. Me and my sister were kids. Obviously, she's younger than me. So it was kind of a bit of an upheaval of sorts. And and then I was in Australia. I feel Australian. I was born there and have a passport. I actually have 3 passports, funnily enough. And then I was just there really until I was 22, and then I started backpacking, as many of us do in Australia. And I don't know, currently in LA, that's my physical history. That's where I've been.
It's exciting. It's funny because you almost look quite, Norwegian. You look like from that part of the world. You got the blonde hair going at the moment. You know what I mean? So those vibes, but for you, there was obviously a turning point in that story, right? A moment of reflection after losing a mate. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, I lost a mate called Chris. He was 24, I was 25. At that point, I finished school, gone to university, got a degree, felt pretty underwhelmed by it all. I then just decided to start traveling, backpacking, drifting, really. And then I was in Canada, and I heard overnight that the phone rang, and it was a friend in Sydney called Bortho, and my buddy Bortho delivered the news to me that Chris had died, and that it had obviously affected a lot of people immediately, including myself. And it made me reflect on Chris's life, and then of course my own. I think that's what death or these sort of darker moments in our lives make us do. Whether it's a loss of life, whether it's an illness, whether that you've been diagnosed with, whether it's a loss of a job or coming out of a relationship or any number of things. And I just kind of thought about my life, and I just thought, geez, am I happy? Like, if I died today, would I be happy? I think that Chris, although it was a life really really well lived, it was far too short. And I should probably say that the other way around. It was a life that was short lived, but really well lived. And if I haven't confused you, what I mean by that is I don't think he would change a thing given another chance. I think he did pretty well. He was values driven. He did all the things that were important to him. And I turned that question on myself in the middle of the night in Canada, and I thought, geez, I don't even know who I am, actually. I feel really lost. In fact, I'm really unhappy. And it was the first time I realized that. So I got a piece of paper and a pen and just started writing down things that I thought would make me happy. And in that moment, I just realized that the most important thing for me, everyone's different perhaps, but for me, I just wanted to be happy. That was a priority. And so with this list of 100 things in front of me, 100 goals, dreams, thoughts, ideas, I thought, well, it's really easy. I'm just going to do that. So I, shortly after that moment, sort of dropped everything in my life to pursue that list. And, here I am years on, still doing it. Done 70 odd things. And, the beautiful part of the story, of course, that it's not about me anymore. We've developed a big global community of people, and 100 Things has gone on to impact a lot of people in very positive ways. It's even saved lives. So, I couldn't be more proud of what it's become.
I think you should be incredibly proud. And I think almost very grateful for your wisdom in that moment, right? To turn tragedy into a point of reflection and a way to sit back and look at your life and make sure that, when yours comes to an end, because eventually that's one certainty of life. We all die at some point in time. And we just hope that when we sit there in the end, we get to reflect on a life really well lived with a smile on our face. And
that's it. I think that, whether you believe in an afterlife or not, we all have that moment where, well, in fact, not all of us do, but, some of us are lucky enough to have a moment of consideration at the end of our life. And I think in that moment, probably you realize, oh my God, there's nothing else. That's it. Again, forgetting maybe an afterlife, whatever, but like for this life, that's it. And it's like, it's just a very real realization. And imagine being in that position and looking back and going, oh, I wish I'd done that all different. I wish I'd spoken to my friend. In fact, there's a book called Regrets of the Dying by a palliative care nurse called Bronnie Ware. I don't know if you've heard of that or heard.
I've heard of it, but I haven't read it.
Yeah, I actually haven't read it either. But it's a nurse who looks after people who are at end of life, and she interviewed them all and came up with the 5 top regrets of the dying. And so these regrets included living a life that others expected of them, not what they wanted to do, working too much, not allowing themselves to be happy. I'm going to forget one here, but one is they wish they'd connected with friends more. And then there's one more, and I can't quite remember what it is. But anyway, I guess the idea is you want to live a life, you get to that final moment and you look back and you think, I wouldn't have changed a thing, even though it's my last breath, it's the last of many good ones.
Well, following on from what you said there, it's funny we speak about this and that this conversation has come at this time in my life, because I've been like, over the course of lockdown in Australia, I was like, I want to sort of challenge myself to write a book. Someone had posed a question to me and asked about the earlier years of my life and where my mindset was formed as a child and how I'm able to tackle the issues with my chronic health. And as I sat and I wrote this book, I wrote about a gentleman that I met along the way. And I was probably 18 years of age when I met a guy named Ernie in hospital, Wollongong Hospital. And I was in because I had some issues with my lungs. My lungs had been bleeding, and I'd met Ernie, who my mum had actually sold him a car. And Ernie was in there because a routine procedure went really wrong and actually poisoned him. And so because of that, he'd formed cancer. And Ernie was probably in his mid-60s, if I recall. And, he shared a room just a few down from mine. And every lunchtime he'd come around after I'd finished my food and we'd have a cup of tea and have a yarn. And Ernie was actually a really interesting man. So he worked at, I think it was Long Bay Jail. So he was like the head warden. So he, had guys like Ivan Milat and some really serious prisoners in his prison there. And we spoke every day. And it's sort of at the end of that week when I left the hospital and Ernie passed a few months later, it made me think at his funeral, every time we spoke, we never spoke of money. We never spoke of professional endeavors or the push of professional endeavors. We spoke about rather the stories that put smiles on our face or made us really think about the times that our heart raced throughout our lives. And we spoke about our family and the people we loved. And he spoke about his ex-wife and his children. And it, really it lends to the fact that in the end, all we have is the people we love and the stories we can tell. And for me, it's been a huge realization in the last few years that should be the focus of my life. And I think it should be the focus, or at least a large focus of everyone's lives, because that's what gives it meaning. That's what gives it purpose. So I have to go back to when you're sitting in this hotel or hostel, I think you said, in Canada, and writing down this list. Was the first thing that come to your mind, I'm going to write a list of 100 things, or did you just start writing?
No, I was actually at a friend's place in Canada, and the first thing that I thought was, well, what's something that will make me happy? And I kind of thought about all those dreams that I'd never had done, because I wasn't encouraged to. So the first thing was actually running of the bulls, which in retrospect, years on, I wouldn't probably do that again. I didn't realize the bulls all get killed at the end. Anyway, forgetting that minor point. I just started writing. And so it was just like a very free-flowing process of just things jumping onto this page. And it was, the more I thought about it, the more excited I became and the more kind of creative I got. And then I'd speak to people about their, hey, have you got a list? I've been writing a list. And they would tell me something. I'd be like, that's amazing. I'm going to put that on my list too. So no, it wasn't meant to be 100. It just kind of ended up being, it might have been 80 or 90 things or something like that. And I thought, well, let's make it around 100. Why not? So it wasn't, there wasn't any design behind it. And just quickly, by the way, the fifth regret of the dying that I forgot was they wish they'd had the courage to express their feelings. Expression. Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to get that out there.
Also, I think that's a huge one. We'll talk about that probably later in the show, I think, as we naturally digress off the back of these incredible 100 things. And I guess for me, what was a really special moment, or seemed like a really pivotal moment in you going on this journey, was you being on the Today Show in Australia. And I remember seeing some footage of this when I was doing some research on YouTube, probably even like 6 months ago, 12 months ago when we first connected. Yeah. And it was Carl Stefanovic and Lisa who I think helped you achieve one of those really big goals on the list.
Which one was it? I can't remember.
Was it number 26? I think I can almost remember. It was Help a Stranger.
Oh, yeah. So, first of all, the media in Australia has been really lovely to me over the years. It's funny, isn't it? Like, all I'm doing is trying to pursue my goals, and it becomes a story. Who'd have thought? Why? If anything, it's actually probably a bit of a sadder reflection on what's considered normal, because that's considered not normal. Like, we should all be out there following our dreams. But with that said, obviously always grateful for that stuff. And, they've helped with awareness and charity fundraising I've been doing over the years, etc. But yeah, it was actually on a show, the one that you're talking about, it was actually on a show called The Circle, and which has been taken off air now. But there was 4 women on there, all really, really loved it. A lady called Denise, Chrissy Swan, Yumi, and oh gosh, I can't remember. She's so lovely. I feel bad now. Anyway, she was just as lovely as the others. And they said, what's on your list? What can we help you with? And I said, well, I want to help a stranger. Yeah, so if there's anyone watching who needs help with something, let me know. And of course, I got quite a few offers, or what would you call it?
Opportunities.
People. Yeah. And the one I ended up sort of choosing, just sort of made the most sense for whatever reason, was a guy in Melbourne called Mark, and he wanted me to shave his head. And I thought, I can do that. So I ended up shaving Mark's. There was actually 2 people I helped from that. One was a girl who was being bullied at high school, and her mum wanted me to go and talk to her school about life and goals and not bullying. And I did that. But Mark, wanted me to shave his head. And I went and shaved Mark's head. And I found out that Mark was a quadriplegic. He was not always that way. He was able-bodied until his mid-20s. And he was backpacking through Greece and got bitten by a tick. And he contracted Lyme's disease. And because of that, a very severe form of Lyme's disease, he lost the ability to move and speak, and need to ventilate to sleep at night, and he's a 24-hour care team. I mean, a lot of really gnarly stuff. It's pretty tragic. And as I shaved his head, I thought I can do more than this. And I asked him if there was anything else on his list. And he actually had a list of 150 things. So there was plenty more. And his carer said that he'd always wanted to complete a half marathon. And I said, well, okay, how can I help do that? And Mark looked at me and asked me to push him. He said, push me. And it was the first 2 words I understood him say. And I just said, yes, of course. So without putting a thought into it, I just knew immediately that I wanted to do it. And I signed us up for the Melbourne Half Marathon, went home to Manly in Sydney, where I was living back then, and got a shopping cart from Coles and started running up and down the beach with a shopping cart for a couple of months. And then went down to Melbourne and took part in this half marathon with Mark, which was unbelievable. And yeah, sort of changed the trajectory of 100 things. Up until that point, it had been me doing things on my list for self gratification, if you will. And this was just helping somebody. I'd never experienced that before. And I felt incredible. And Mark, of course, got to achieve something from his list as well. And that sort of led to this point in 100 things where I just started helping people instead of doing things on my list. And that's been a wonderful journey.
That's so interesting. And it leans into a question that I was really curious to ask you. And I read a little bit of a book at the beginning of this year by a guy named Jay Shetty, who you may be familiar with. And Jay speaks about, he spent time as a monk. And he speaks about how basically as a monk, 50% of your day is in service of yourself. So things like meditation and breathing and walking and really being spiritual and working on your mental health and your focus. But then 50% of the day, the remaining 50% is spent on the service of others. So it might be building huts in the community, helping people with things. And he speaks about this beautiful balance where there is so much you get from being in service of others. And a question I really had for you was, firstly, how much of your list had you sort of ticked off percentage-wise, roughly, before helping Mark? And then obviously that being a pivotal moment in the journey, reflecting back, were you doing things for you? Was that making you happy? Was it filling the void that you once felt? Or was it really not until you actually started to sort of steer at that in the direction of service of others that you started to feel that?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I don't know. I can't remember exactly how many things I've done for my list, but just to fall in line with Jay's statistics, I would say 50%. Why not? I don't know though.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, what I see. So we run a lot of workshops, online courses and stuff around list building, and the list is the tip of the iceberg. It's about trying to find meaning in the things that we do in life, and hopefully we evolve as individuals and then as a collective, whether it's a friendship circle, a family, a business, a community. And then I think you connect with other people. But the first step for me is definitely connecting with yourself. And I think you do that by doing things for yourself. We live in a society where that's deemed as selfish a lot of the time. And I think that's a shame. I think being selfish is crucial. I think being selfish, in fact, leads to being selfless. There's that whole, there's a million sort of cliche metaphors about it, but you can't fill up someone else's cup unless yours is full. And that's what it is. So what we see in these workshops that we do is that a lot of people are either one or the other. They're either only selfish or only selfless, and both are unhealthy. It's great to say that you help everyone else and you're doing everything for everyone else, but yes, it fills you up to a degree, but you need to be on purpose yourself. There are things that we need to be doing by ourselves. So I think a healthy list is a combination of all the things. Again, in our course, we would say that we use this, I kind of developed this thing that we call a wheel of life. If you imagine a bicycle wheel, and then you have the tire, of course, around the outside and the hub in the middle. It's the spokes that give that wheel structure and allow it to roll and be efficient and effective. So if you then consider that bike wheel for a moment to be a representation of your life, you have all the external factors, which is the tire essentially, and the hub is kind of like the internal things, maybe your experience previous. But the spokes are what give it structure. And if you look at the spokes as potentially your values or, aspects of your life which are just crucial to you, not specific goals, but just elements, that's where your list should come from. And, of course, we find, having done this for a while now, that a lot of the spokes are similar, but, they are different too. But like family is on there, connection is on there, self-development, career, financial security, adventure, humor. It goes on and on and on. Health, obviously. And so, the impact and service is usually on there too. So I think it goes to show that, you can't just say you need to be selfish or you need to just work on yourself. You can't just say you can only help other people. It's a combination. So, me skydiving is just as important to me as, taking Mark for a run or whatever. I think they're both important. I hear from a lot of mums, who they've spent their lives, and dads, but more so mums, dedicated to like, helping their children grow up. And when the children finally leave home, the general sentiment that I hear of via email is, right, I'm suddenly by myself again. I don't have to look after my kid as I was for the last 18 years. Who am I? I got no idea. And that's a very unhealthy place to be. It's great to, of course, bring up a child and put all your love and attention into them, but you've got to show up for yourself. Otherwise, you end up being a little empty. And also, I think it's interesting to say that your kids want to look up to someone. The role model should be someone who's out there achieving their goals and dreams. So, that's a great role model to have. So it's not selfish. It's really important.
Mate, I couldn't agree with that more. It's a conversation that I've had to have with the two most dedicated and selfless human beings on the planet, being my parents, that, so appreciative. Without my parents, I probably wouldn't be alive, or I'd be very unhealthy right now, because they sacrificed a lot for my chronic illness to be maintained really well, and for me to be in great health today and to do all the things that I do. So I'm very beyond thankful for them. They're the most amazing people in the world. But there comes a time where it's like, you've got to forget about me and really get the most out of your life, because you hate to see, I've seen too many things in hospital walls where lives are ended short, and they're very short-lived. And I can imagine there's a lot of regret there, even if you are the most selfless human being on the planet. And so I say to my parents all the time, go and live your life, experience life, because that's what this is about. I'm really curious as to, in the process of building that wheel and working out what the spokes are, where do you feel? And I, as we spoke about, it is a very selfish journey, so it's different for everyone. But where do people tend to go wrong with building that wheel in their own lives? Have you seen like a trend of people maybe thinking that something is more important than others, or not understanding the foundation and the structure of that?
Well, yes. I mean, another great question. I feel like the main issue is that people don't give themselves permission to consider it in the first place. Because again, there's this blueprint that isn't necessarily bad, but, we go to school, further education, get a job, a series of jobs, collect money, get a career, buy a house, have a family, Nothing wrong with that. But it doesn't really, I personally, I never had, when I went to my career advisor at the end of high school and said, I'm a bit lost, what do I do? And he went, get a degree. He didn't ask me, well, what are you into? What makes you smile? Are you passionate about anything? And so that never really happened. I was never given, I always waited for permission from other people. We all have families, and some of everyone's family is different, of course, but I think there are pressures and generational trends which are imparted upon us by our parents, even though they mean the best for us. They only know what they know. Not to belittle them at all, but I know one main reason for my degree was to try and make my parents happy. Turned out they didn't really care. So there's a lot of pressure. And we tend to do what we're told. And so I think, back to your question, when it comes to the wheel, what do people miss out? Well, I think it's the very first step. Step one, we have 8 steps to creating and activating your ultimate list, right? Step 1 is permission. Allow yourself to think about yourself. That is it. And you can all do it. Everyone can do it. It's a split-second decision. That's the thing that people miss. And then when you do that, because I speak to a ton of, really successful people, who do far more incredible things than, me, my list items. And I ask each one of them, like, how are you able to do what you're able to do? Why were you able to do that? And they all say a variation of, I just gave myself permission. And when you do that, you allow yourself to kind of acknowledge your values, to identify your principles, to understand what really lights you up on the inside. And in that process, you start to think and start to come up with goals, like things that are important to you. And that's kind of the creation of this, the list. We would say step 2 is reflection. I think it's really important to reflect on where you've been. No, you can't change it, of course, but it's really important to know, like, how have you been behaving and what's got you to where you are now? You can't change it, but if you understand your patterns, you can then sort of forecast, well, if I keep going in this direction, where will I be? And if you're stoked with that, great, keep going. But if you think, oh, I'd like to change that 1 degree or 180 degrees, it's up to you. And, and what is that change? That's goal setting. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like the question isn't what are people missing in their spokes. The question more so is why are people not even sitting down to consider it? Because you should. You should. We all have something special. We all have something that's unique, or there's ways for us to contribute and just feel good. I think ultimately you feel good by being yourself. But if you only listen to what other people around you suggest you should do, you never get that moment to think about yourself and try and figure out who you are. And ultimately, that's what I believe a list is. It's just the tip of the iceberg. It doesn't really matter how many things I've done or what I've done. It's just each thing I've done has allowed me to experience life and myself in a different way. And I'm forever, I hope, getting closer to understanding who I actually am.
Oh, mate, I think that's an incredible answer, because you actually answered another one of the questions that had popped into my mind at the beginning of this podcast, which was, being still in your early 20s and sitting down to create this list and steering off the normal. And, we put normal in quotes there because like we said, why is it normal and why is it so normal just to follow this path? And I thought, I wonder how you felt in that moment, whether there was a little bit of anxiety or fear around confronting your parents and telling them of your plans and your ideas to go and tackle this list. Because I know when I speak to people, and, a good bunch of people have asked me, because I walked away from a relatively good and secure job just as I started to get good at it and started to earn some money to pursue this and to really live out my dream. And a lot of people ask me, what do your parents think? How do you have that conversation with your parents? Are they worried? And I'm really blessed that mine were amazing about it and understood why I wanted to do this. But I think for most people, it's the hardest hurdle. And I think the longer you wait, and you may, correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but I think the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to give yourself permission, because, then love comes into the equation. You've got a, significant other, and then, they've got to be a part of that journey then too. Or maybe you got kids or you got a mortgage. I think the earlier you can grant yourself that permission to go and pursue life and to do what's really purpose-driven for you, it allows you then to open up and to flow so much freer.
I agree entirely. Yeah. I mean, I think the last word you said then, being freer, we ask people to define what happiness is to them. And one of the first words that come up is feeling free. And how can you feel free if you're not voicing your truth, if it were, so, I mean, look, ideally getting support from your loved ones and people who are just innately in your life is crucial. But if that's not the case, forget about it. As in, forget about them. No, and I don't mean an aggressive deleting numbers. I'm not speaking to you again, mum and dad. It's not that. But you've got to have the conviction, and I think my dad was kind of supportive when I left. My mum wasn't. They've both come around fully, and, and that's all nice and stuff. But my best mate, I sat down with him days before flying out, just a few days before flying out to start this on my birthday, my 28th birthday, 2009. And he said, I think you're making a mistake. You're an idiot. What are you doing? You're 28. It's not what people do. People settle down and, whatever they do. And, but I just knew I just wasn't happy. For me, I felt quite lucky. I'd given myself permission to truly think about where I was going in life. And as soon as I said and realized, oh, I just want to be happy. That is the only thing. And I had this list. It was, I bought a ticket overseas and that was it. So I didn't care if anyone supported me or not. I didn't have a lot of support. It didn't worry me. And like that, I think that's a big step for some people. This idea of, because I'm a bit of a people pleaser, and I think a lot of people are. And you also want to be loved, right? You want to be loved. You want to have your support network, and to kind of disrupt your life in a way where suddenly no one really supports what you're doing. You could sort of go back into the shell and go, okay, but who does that help? And anyone I've ever met who's made that change, including you, I'm sure, would not regret it, right? Is that true for you?
100%. It was the greatest decision I made in my life. And what I found was, before making the decision, I was like you, a real people pleaser, a real yes man. I found it really hard to say no without feeling like I was letting people down. Felt like I always had to be almost like I was almost the warrior for everyone. Like if someone had an idea or something they wanted to achieve, I almost had to give up on everything I wanted or everything I thought of my future being to
Yeah.
help them achieve it. And ultimately it led to real frustration where I got to a point at the end of my, like I was in real estate, I got to the point at the last like 12 to 6 months of that, I was not myself. I was so angry and frustrated all the time. And I was, like not incredibly, but I found myself taking it out and taking that anger and frustration out on the people around me. Like I was just short and a little brash. And I'm like, this isn't me. And I'm just so unhappy doing this. And I just didn't want to get out of bed and go to work in the morning.
Yeah.
And for me, making the decision, I sat in front of my boss and like I shed tears when I told him that I'm leaving, because for me, it felt like just the greatest weight was lifted off my shoulders. I was like, oh my God, this is the first time in years that I've actually done something for myself.
Yeah.
And in sharing that and then going on and pursuing this, what I found is so many great things have come into my life. There is, I created a little charity initiative last year, which I never would have done if I hadn't left, because I would have said I didn't have the time or, I didn't have the mental capacity to take it all on. So, for me, I do not regret it for a single second. It was one of the greatest decisions I've ever made in my life.
Yeah, for sure. No, I'm so happy to hear that. And it's true. It's true for anyone you speak to who's done something they truly are passionate about and are truly curious about. And, and if you hadn't done that, if I hadn't done what I did, that's a regret, right? There's people who go, I wish I had not done the thing. Number one regret in Bronnie Ware's book, I wish I had done things true to myself, not what others expected of me. That is that in a nutshell. And there's two things I want to add to that. One is, if you don't have a support network, it might seem quite daunting, to like take a leap based on just what you think or what you believe. But there are people out there, and the onus is on you to go and find them. There are people out there to support everything. And, as you found support and, in starting a charity initiative or whatnot, I found support at every single step of the way by complete strangers. And, now there's a big community behind it, which is great. But I think also, like, just something to note is there's a difference, and it's very slight, between, I think, someone who's very passionate and curious about what's important to them, and they have an idea, or at least they're very committed to an idea of something that will better them as a person. I'm all for that. There's also the subtle difference is then there are people who I think just want to avoid and shirk off responsibility and go, well, I'd rather just be more of a rebel. And, like I'm not wise enough to sort of talk about that too much, but I would suggest that there is a difference. And if you're doing it for the former reason, you think there's something better, you have an idea of what it is, it's something that you're passionate about and that you think it's something to do with your purpose, let's hope, go for it. But if it's just, I don't want to go to university, or I don't want to work because I don't want to, therefore I'm just going to, go and smoke, I don't think that's, obviously that's not healthy. So there's just, I think there's some serious, candid internal conversation to have for people who are considering what they're doing. I think it's the why, as always. Why are you doing what you're doing?
And I think you spoke about it before anyways, like it's this whole decision and it's the whole search for freedom is you being true to yourself, right? So I think, if you are the latter, you sit there and, like, if you're being true with yourself, you're going to have to face that at some point regardless. So I feel like not many people get away with that for long. Like that starts to eat away at them.
Yeah, it was quite confronting, like it is. I get it. It's confronting to like look at yourself in the mirror and actually have a proper look, literally or kind of metaphorically, like it is. But that's what we need to do. Like in the same way, like if you take the car to, for some reason I keep coming up with analogies. I don't know why, but like if you took your car to the mechanic, the mechanic looks at it, it finds out what needs fixing, and he or she fixes it. Then the car runs better. As people, we don't like to actually open up the hood and go, right, where am I a little bit? Where am I in need of fixing? For some reason, we just rather keep that bonnet or hood down and keep driving. And of course, at some point, the car's going to start smoking and break down. So I think that idea of looking at yourself in the mirror, having a good look, what am I doing well? What am I not doing well? That's the reflection piece of our course. And then from that, understand what needs to get fixed. And then the beauty is you can fix stuff. It's never too late. There are people in our community who are 60, 70, 80 years old coming up with lists. It's never too late to smile. It's never too late to make a decision. And the beauty of life is that we have the choice to do that. You choose to change, you choose not to. You choose to walk towards happiness, you choose not to. You choose to be, I think, successful, I think you choose not to be. And we're entirely accountable for what we do. And I think if if you realize that, it's very empowering, even if you feel there's a lot to change, like I did when I was 25, 24, 25. Yeah, it's empowering with the right mindset. It's also very confronting, but it's actually beautiful that we get to choose.
It's incredible to hear that there's so many people from all walks of life stepping in to make that decision for themselves. I'm curious to hear a little bit about this list. So let's talk about maybe your top 2 or 3 things that you've ticked off this list, and those moments and those feelings.
Well, I mean, it's hard to sort of separate them. I mean, there are a few that are quite known because they're very abstract. Marrying a stranger, delivering a baby, walking across France, living on a deserted island for a week, things like that, which are just sort of attention grabbing, but they're not necessarily the best. I mean, I don't know, whichever ones I'm sort of working on. I visited an inmate on death row. I wrote a book. I did a triathlon. I'm learning French now. I'm trying to learn a classical piano piece. I don't know how to play piano. I'm learning it off YouTube. Like, each and every one of these things gets me out of my comfort zone, where I think is a really good place for people to go, because you realize where your edges are and you can tease those a little further, and you realize how capable you are. But I think it's about just having like a sense of purpose, right? Like, I could sit on, I've got this little keyboard behind me, and I could sit on there for 2 hours trying to learn off YouTube, like like a Guitar Hero thing. The lights come down, they light up the keys, and I try and just get my fingers to perform. And I can be there for 2 hours and learn 3 seconds of that song. I'm 2 minutes into it at the moment. It's taken me 7 months. And when I'm doing it, there's nowhere else I'd rather be. And that's kind of living on purpose, I feel. So I don't think goals have to be necessarily life-changing. They don't necessarily have to be world-changing. They just have to be meaningful and relevant to you. The beauty of the list, again, is that it can be really diverse. You can have the silly stuff. You can have the mundane stuff. As long as it's meaningful, you can have simple, complex, short-term, long-term, joyful, emotional, challenging. You can have all those things. So, I mean, and on each occasion when I'm achieving my list, or certainly when I achieve them, I just feel this sense of complete freedom, to use that word that you used earlier. I feel empowered. I feel like buzzing on a lot of occasions. I just feel like I'm just living on purpose, and to be able to, I honestly think, like, I wouldn't change a thing in my life. I wouldn't change a thing. And I like to be able to say that and mean it. And it's because I kind of have a lot of goals which are meaningful to me. So I don't know, in terms of, like, to your question, what are the main 3 favorite things? They're all unreal. I feel great on every single occasion. And I want to reiterate, you don't have to be crazy. You don't have to jump out of a plane to feel that way. You just have to do something meaningful. And it can be, we just had a lady do our course, and her number 1 goal was to create better boundaries in her life, so that toxic people were asked to leave, I suppose, and not allowed back in. And that was, that was a tear-jerking call that we had, because that was so meaningful to her. So lists can be anything. Read more, say I'm sorry, say I love you, or of course they can be ridiculous, pose nude at an art class or what have you.
You know what I love, Seb, is listening to you talk about that there, and you speak about the few things that you're tackling at the moment. I love that, even in the evolution of 100 things, and how this has turned into a business where you're helping other people and you're speaking, and you're doing these media engagements and podcast engagements. You've not lost sight of the fact that actually going out and doing these things is so important to you. And I think a lot of people would, right? Like, it becomes that thing where it's like, well, life's a bit crazy now, and this is about like building the business side of it and building the following and the social presence. But you've really stayed true to the purpose of what you discovered so many years before. And I think, you need to be commended.
I appreciate it.
No, I think that's really important. It's a really special thing to hear. I'm really interested to hear about your maneuver into sort of keynote speaking and sharing your story. What's that been like?
Well, it was kind of, I never thought I'd speak about this, what happened? I think I got asked I was like a year and a half into 100 things, and someone said, you should speak at a travel conference in England, and connected me. And the lady who was organizing the conference said, yeah, come and speak. So I flew to England. I was in Canada at the time. And I just gave a talk. I just put a PowerPoint on the stage of like all the things I'd done. And it was, I knew really quickly that this story was resonating with people, and it seemed to be because, you know, I represented, you know, a lot of people. I wasn't the only person who was unhappy and wanted to make a change. And so, you know, even people who were sort of high flyers started resonating with it. Like, I just had a lot of support immediately. And so, yeah, I was on stage and I spoke about some of the things I had done and why I had done it. But my call to action on my first keynote ever was, what's on your list? I used to love asking that question. It's sort of become a tagline, I guess, now. So I did that. I really enjoyed it. Went back to Australia soon after, wrote this book. I got asked to write a book. And then companies just started calling me, getting in touch, saying, would you speak to our crew? And I remember Googling, like, professional speaking, like, is professional speaking a thing? And it was. And I remember speaking to, there's a speaking bureau, and I remember calling up a speaking bureau in Australia, and I won't name them, but I joke with the person I call because we've become friends professionally now. But back then I called him and I was like, hey, I was like, hi, I just Googled professional speaking. I don't know anything about it, but I did a talk in England recently and I really enjoyed it and I got some good feedback. How do I get into this? And this guy was like, if there's anyone listening who's a professional speaker, they'll know this guy. And he was like, yeah, so he goes, mate, you need to be able to engage an audience from the moment you get on stage to the moment you get off. You need to have a call to action. You need to have a great stage presence, the way you put yourself on stage. The story needs to be intricate, needs to be layered. You need to be able to do this. You need to follow. And it was a million things. He goes, do you know how many speakers out of 100 who call me up get to be speakers? And I was like, how many? He said, -3. Anyway, so I remember putting down the phone going, what happened there? And so I thought, well, that's not for me. But yeah, companies sort of kept on getting in touch. And so I was very fortunate. This company called PIS, I think they've changed names. Anyway, I was approached by PIS. They were like an investment firm, professional investment services, I think their name was. Robbie, the founder of that company, said, hey, do you want to do a talk for us? I did a talk for them. And then he said, hey, do you want to speak to all our places all over the country? So I must have done like 20 or 30 talks for this company, getting paid $500 a talk. And I was stoked. I couldn't believe I was making $500 a talk. And of course, like, you know, they say with professional speaking, it's good to just get runs on the board. Like, just speak. You'll get better. And I loved it. And I was getting better. And I found that I kind of honed my message a little bit. And over the 10 years I've been speaking now, you know, I've realized a lot more things about 100 things. And I do every day. You know, I knew very quickly it wasn't just about me. I think I spoke for, you know, I represented, as I said, like what a lot of people think. So they saw a lot of themselves in me. So, and it, you know, turns out it's a very simple concept, right? Being happy and feeling good. We all want that. Personal lives, professional lives, etc. And so I was very fortunate. I didn't have a plan with professional speaking. It just sort of snowballed. And, you know, me moving to America 4 years ago, that was interesting too. You know, I could have just sort of stayed in Australia and really doubled down on speaking and, you know, getting paid more and, you know, earning more money and whatever. But I kind of like thought about it and I thought, well, I think there's more impact to be made. And so I'm working on a few things out here with 100 things, as well as now speaking professionally out here in the US, which is a different nut to crack, but it's been going really well. So I sort of left Australia and haven't really done much. I actually got booked yesterday for a virtual keynote in Australia. I haven't done one in ages. Where am I going with this sentence? I kind of forgotten the question, but yeah, that's been the professional speaking thing for me. It's been great. It's developed beautifully over 10 years and really proud to say that, you know, I think I've become sort of popular on the speaking circuit here as well. And, you know, it's just getting bigger and bigger and I love it. It's making impact. I mean, I speak and people cry. And, you know, for a long time I thought, why is that? You know, why is that? But I get emails and it would change people's lives. It saved people's lives. People in my talks have, emailed me and I've met up with as many as I can. And you know, some people have like been been severely depressed and have been on the cusp, if not having started sort of self-harm. And they suddenly, you know, I do what I can to sort of support their journey into creating a list and achieving some of the goals. And their lives have all turned around. I couldn't stop doing what I do. I mean, keynote, it's lovely to say I do keynotes, but I mean, it's just a vessel to like further spread a good message. And I'm very grateful for it.
Storytelling is powerful. It's, you know, it's a special thing to be able to share, you know, and I think looking back, like that's one thing that I love about the hardship of my life and the challenges that I've been thrown is it gives you a story to tell. And, you know, you've worked really hard to find this story within your own life that is having incredible impact for people. It's why we're sitting here now, because, you know, I was touched by it. So it's really, really exciting to hear, brother. And it's great to see you have a smile on your face when you talk about it. I want to talk quickly about the journey in America, and the sort of years ahead. Like, what are the plans, and where do you see 100 Things going?
Yeah, well, so for a long time, I mean, the truth about 100 Things was it was just this beautiful accident in the sense that it resonated with people when it turned into books and TV shows and document. I had no idea how it just did. And I think the truth, if I was to sort of really be honest, is that just sort of became my narrative. I was like, oh, I'm the guy with 100 things. Everything's just lovely and it's all fallen into place. But that's kind of the downside, not the downside of that, but like if I was just to kind of keep up that story, I think I miss out on actually owning it and going, right, what are we going to do with this thing? And so that's been the last sort of 18 months to 2 years. So I've taken on a business partner, Toddy. He's English. He lives in England at the moment. And he's a good mate and he shares all the values of 100 Things, smart guy. I think I've lacked kind of business nous. Toddy has a lot more of that than I do. It's great. And he's more of a strategist and a bit of a road planner. So together, we've really sat down and had some awesome conversations and gone through a lot of activities or processes to identify what we want to do with 100 Things. So we've identified that, of course, the general public is a big market for us, as is business organizations, as are schools. So we're currently putting that into some kind of priority of which ones we're going to develop, what products within each thing can we do. Budgeting and all this sort of stuff comes into it. And, there's a chance of taking on some money quite soon so that we can execute on some of these plans. Again, I'm just sort of opening up entirely to you here. So it's great. I mean, the thing that's beautiful about it is the product's great. We know that. There's no sort of bullshit here. No one's trying to convince anyone of anything. It just is what it is, which has been a really positive thing. Over the 12 years to now, I've received nothing but positivity and questions from people saying, how do I take the next step? And I've tried to do what I can very manually with individuals, and with businesses. After a keynote, they'll say, what now? We want to do something with our staff. And I'll say, oh, haven't really thought of that. And schools, how do we incorporate some kind of learning program for our students? And I never know. But so I've been told basically just from listening and observation, oh, well, I know what needs to be done. So we're developing a program for school. We have this wonderful mental wellness and staff engagement product that we're about to launch in the US. We're currently doing some tests with some organizations. And the general public, we've got this 8-step course, which I've mentioned, which is already, we've done 6 months of beta testing and it's just unreal. It's changed lives. So I think the immediate plan is within the next 12 months to ramp up those 3 areas. And I think, over the next 5 years, just develop them, refine them, understand what they do, where we can change it, where we can better it. I don't know where we actually end up in 5 years, but I'd love to think that 100 Things was impacting millions of people. Because it's funny, like I did a documentary with ESPN. It's been seen 20 million times. Some of my talks have gone online. They've been seen millions of times, but I'm not impacting millions of people outside of that, and I should be. So, it's about taking it, just looking at 100 Things in a different way, not forgoing any of the values or any of the stuff, the beautiful stuff that's been built upon, but just creating more of a vessel where people can actually go, right, I'm going 100 Things and this is what I'm going to do, and it's going to better me. And so we're just trying to get to a point where it's actually useful in practical ways. It has great utility for many people and organizations.
Well, let me just say you found a fan in me. I'm a big fan of what you are doing, who you are and what you stand for, and the message of 100 Things. And I honestly believe that for the people who come across this and engage in your story, but also the courses and the things that you're building to help people find that happiness in their life, that I guess you will be like, in your journey will almost be like a treasure map to freedom, that F word that we've spoken about so many times throughout the course of this episode. So I want to say thank you so much. And before I finish this up, I want to ask for maybe some words of wisdom. Like if you had to sum this up in just a few words, or give somebody a message that they leave this podcast with, it's cemented at the front of their mind, what would it be?
Well, I would say that, kind of like reflecting briefly on what we had said earlier, I personally couldn't see that situation of lying in your bed, your deathbed, reflecting back on your life and thinking, I wish I'd done that differently for myself and others in every aspect of life, or some aspects of life. And no one wants that. How do you change that? You change it right now by making decisions right now. All we have is right now, and we're all empowered to do it through choice. No matter what you act, no matter what you think, that's the truth. The truth is we all have access to change. It's an internal thing. So what's the first step to do it? I would say, just for a moment, even after this podcast, just ask yourself that question: what's on your list? What's on your list? What's important to you? Because I think with true consideration, the answer to that question has the potential to completely change your life, and be additive to a life well lived with no regrets. And I think by doing that, you become so much better and more effective and productive for others. And of course, what we've spoken about is the idea that we look after ourselves so that we can help other people. And obviously, if anyone wants a hand with any of that journey or process, let me know, and we can correspond. But ask yourself the question, what's on your list? That would be my first suggestion.
I love it. Ask yourself the question, what is on your list? And then grant yourself the permission to go and seek and discover and go on that journey. Sebastian Terry, you're an absolute gem of a human, mate. I'm really, really grateful for your time. And
thanks,
I'm so glad we got to share your story. I'm going to make sure that within the show's description, all of your social tags and your website, and basically every point of contact for people to engage and to get in contact with you will be there. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Mate, of course. Thank you so much for having me, mate. And thank you.
My absolute pleasure.